Thanks, Heather. So thank you for all having me join the Student Leadership Conference today. As Heather said, my name is James Carroll, and I'm our Director of Student Conduct Rights and Responsibilities on campus. And I've been here 4.5 years, originally from the East Coast, grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So any West Coast Steelers fans out here, I'm always willing to connect based on Steelers. Sorry, any Bay Area teams. I own my loyalty. And Heather asked to share a little bit about my student leadership as far as organizations I was part of. And so I had to took me a minute to kind of think back. But I was involved, I was an orientation leader. I was an RA for a couple years, and I was also a health peer educator. And then specific student organizations that I was part of, I'm part of the Greek community, a member of Sigma Phi Epsilon fraternity, and I was also in the student hall government, so hall council RHA when I was in college. And then I was also involved in an association for my major. I think the names have changed over time, but it was basically for consumer services and businesses. Business was my an organization for our major. And those were probably my main leadership pieces. You know, when I think about that, that's probably what has brought me to college, or to be working on a college campus, was, to be honest, all of my student leadership experience in college. And so when I think about where I thrived most as first in family and first generation student, it was learning how to navigate college and feeling that I was part of a community. And so definitely my leadership experience was what really did that for me. But with that, I want to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to share my screen with a PowerPoint here. So I really outlined 3 goals for our time together this afternoon. One is to understand some of the community campus expectations for student organizations and individual students to ensure success. Number 2 would be to define organizational culture, and really understand what that means in terms of thinking about the success of your organizations. And really, while I am from student conduct, the main focus will really be a theme around organizational culture. And then the third thing is to explore the process of performing a culture audit. And I'll have some resources at the end. And I've also forwarded them to be put in the leadership folder, that there's a couple handouts that you could actually use for your organizations if you wanted to move forward with a culture audit. And so to start us off, I wanted to ask folks to engage and put some thoughts in the chat. And the prompt is, if you could share some examples of conflict, challenges, or conduct that may be toxic for an organization. Now, and this could be mainly thinking about your student organizations, but this could be really any organization that you've been a part of. It could be a work environment. And so feel free to kind of just drop some things in the chat in terms of what are things that tend to be toxic. And with that, I'm going to stop share for a minute so I can see the chat and see what folks are writing. And again, I'd encourage folks to also take a look at the chat as you're writing things so you can see what folks have entered. So lack of decision-making structure, talking over folks. Attacking each other, so not really having kind of any clear expectations of engagement when there is conflict. Power hoarding, rude assumptions, making judgments. Okay, any last things folks want to put in the chat? So a couple additionally that I would, name, when I think about toxic environment, can also be around even student conduct type behaviors, particularly if we're talking about student organizations. And we'll come back to that. So let me share again so we can see the PowerPoint. And again, just a reminder, these slides are available or will be available in the leadership slide deck. So you'll be able to see those. So don't feel free to have to take notes. And present here. Okay, so Um, I put a picture in the top because I think this is kind of, while it can be kind of a trite comment, the idea that a couple bad apples can ruin a bunch, right? If anyone's ever heard that, terminology or phrase before, think about kind of how a rottening apple, if you leave it in the bowl of apples, how that can have an impact, right? It speeds up the process to impact other apples, right? So other apples may go bad more quickly. And so some of the ways that we might intervene to address that is some of the apples we may need to throw away. So maybe the sense with an organization, maybe there are times where you need to remove folks from an organization. Maybe you've tried really lots of efforts, but the reality might be is they are too toxic or they're creating a negative impact. And so maybe that could be a decision that folks may need to be removed from an organization. But other things to consider is as an apple is starting to go bad in the bowl of fruit, maybe before you throw that apple out, you might be able to use it. So maybe you quickly, maybe it's not kind of feels fresh to eat right away, but maybe you could cut that apple and put it into a pie or do other things. And so thinking about other ways that you can engage if folks aren't doing so well, there's opportunities. You don't have to throw folks away and move that on. And so I like that analogy. While it's not perfect, I do think it kind of can relate to, there's definite options when you can do in terms of addressing behavior. But a couple of things I wanted to just share a few slides of is for student organizations that are recognized with the university, if there's behavior that would kind of begin to fall into a conduct or a student conduct or a violation of a code situation, it could be handled one or multiple ways. And so one is every student organization has responsibilities as a recognized organization for conduct. So that would be one example there, is an organization could be accountable. And I put links there for where the policies are, as well as there's a reporting form that if you wanted to report a concern or a member of the community wanted to report a concern about an organization, there is a form on the Student Life website to do that. And then it could also be handled additionally or separately for an individual student. So if a student is registered, as a student with the university, it might relate to organizational behavior, but it might also relate to individual student behavior, which would then be referred to my office. And so oftentimes, if there's a situation that arises with a student organization, I'll partner with Student Life and leadership programs, and we'll review that situation and then determine the best courses of action. So it might be, maybe it's something that really just needs coaching from Student Life to address. But maybe there's a situation where we're not going to necessarily ding the organization, but maybe there's something that where an individual student could be held or should be held accountable. And so I've put links in there where you can kind of see what the codes and policies. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about policies and codes. Folks can look that up and read it. But I wanted to put as far as the actions, and I kind of mentioned there's some examples. A student organization could lose recognition, which that may mean inability to recruit members, access to resources or reserving rooms, inability to table. So really inability to function if you lose your recognition. Other actions could be a workshop or something educational to give back. If there's other issues that related to damage, there could be financial impact to an organization, or maybe an organization is given a probationary status. And so there's just kind of some examples there of what could happen if there's policy. And then for individual students, the Student Code of Conduct is consistent across all CSUs. And I listed some examples there of what can happen, whether it's a warning, discipline, probation, suspension, or expulsion from the university. And we also do workshops, educational remedies. However, individual student conduct incidents are part of a permanent record for a student. And so that becomes part of a university record. And I put these quotes here because I do think it's important when you think about, and this is how I kind of think about living my life. It's not just about a student org or an individual student being accountable, but all of us as leaders have, our every action has consequences. And so I like the quote of making sure it is the one you intend. I like the quote of integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. And for me, that kind of exemplifies some of those things. We will all make choices that could be, concerning, problematic throughout our time. But another way to really look at it is, how do we mitigate concerns that could come up? And then what do we do when a situation arises in working with, again, either student life or my office in terms of addressing a conflict? And so I want to move us into a little bit about organizational culture. And so interested to see in folks' answers, when you hear the word organizational culture, how would you define that? And this would be an example. So again, folks could drop it in the chat. What would be your definition of an organizational culture? Folks could also feel free, if you want to raise your hand or speak in the room. Definitely, we welcome someone to provide a definition if you have.
Are you asking for the description or the example?
A definition of organizational culture.
It's just a way of behaving, a way of thinking about the culture, the other people, how you relate, and how you handle problems. Do you tell somebody else, or do you directly address the person?
Right, thank you. And so those are some good examples there. See also in the chat, proper way of behaving in an organization. And so with that, organizational culture, and so I listed here some examples: values and behaviors that contribute, to the organization and the environment. Listed some examples: values, beliefs, principles, factors that protect or are part of the history, technology, strategy, type of employee, management style. And I would also, again, equate organization more broadly. We're focusing today on student organization, but I would apply this also to any work environment too. And so there is a management consultant by the name of Peter Drucker. And one of the phrases and themes that he talks about in some of his publications he's written around organizational culture is that organizational culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so a way to think about that is, you can say that your organization is about A, B, and C values and believe that's the case. But if you're living in an environment where the members of your organization feel it is toxic, or some of those things we listed at the beginning, not really functional, folks don't feel valued, they don't feel heard, respected, any strategy you put in place for your organization, Peter Drucker would tell us, will not be effective. So, and I think it's an interesting and a good example to kind of think about organizations. And again, I would apply it to a workplace. Think about a job or an environment that you've been where in one belief you enjoy aspects of your work, but maybe it's a toxic environment for reason A, B, or C. And so Peter Drucker would tell us, you could put every effort in place to strategize to fix or improve your organization, but if you don't focus on changing the culture, you will fail at that. And so another slide here, and I'm not going to spend too much time, but really is looking at that idea that culture change is kind of a results pyramid, that experience, beliefs, and actions of the people in your organization constitute the culture. And then your culture produces results. So if you look at the bottom rung, experiences foster beliefs, beliefs influence actions, and actions produce results. So just kind of another way to when you think about culture change. And so one of the interesting things I wanted to share, and so I've done some work with the consulting firm in San Francisco, Great Place to Work, and they are one of the global authorities on workplace culture. And so they do a lot of work with consulting. They're based in San Francisco, and they have offices throughout the globe now that they've kind of grown over the last 10 or 15 years. And a lot of their work is that they have a survey that they work with companies on called the Trust Index Survey. And each year they work with Fortune to put out the top 100 great places, best places to work for. And so obviously organizations that are reflected there are companies, you need to participate to be part of the recognition, right? I mean, you participate in the survey. But a few things I wanted to share is that, what they evaluated. And for the 2021, they obviously did some additional focus for the survey on how that work environment was addressing work through a pandemic. And so a lot of the engagement questions for employees were satisfaction, trustworthy, caring, fair company in time of crisis, and then looking at employees' physical, emotional, and financial health. And then also looking at the company's broader community impact. So what type of influence does the company have on our greater society? Are they giving back? Are they providing a service that is really helping to positively, effectively change the world? And then, so the survey that they do is about 60% of the score is based on confidential employee feedback, so participation in a confidential survey. And the other 40% a review of the programs that the company has in place that are for employee support, engagement, satisfaction. And so I wanted to share what the top 10 list is for this year. And again, you can actually you'll see a link in the information if you want to actually see the top 100. The company also does top 100 places to work for women. There's different identity groups that they rank and look at as far as engagement. So there's a lot of different workplace rankings they look at, but this is kind of just the overall for companies that are 1,000 or more employees. And so these are the top 9 of the 10. I'm going to save the first one to or the number 1 winner this year to see what folks might see. And so what you'll see is obviously American Express, Capital One, Camden Property Trust, Texas Health Resources, UKG, which is also an information technology company, Rocket Companies, Wegmans, which is also a retail, Hilton, hospitality, Salesforce, we know, right across the bay in San Francisco. And curious, I'm going to stop sharing, seeing in the chat, does anyone want to take a guess of who was listed as the top company to work for best workplace engagement and satisfaction for employees? Okay, kind of take a stab. Okay, so I'm seeing Omar, you have won the unofficial prize. It is Cisco. And so I'm going to go back to share. So Cisco is listed as the number 1. And I'd seen also in there, Apple is not, I don't think, listed in the top 100. They may not have participated. I will share that I saw someone put in Google. Google did have the number 1 spot for about, I want to say it was 3 to 5 years. I'm not sure the exact number of years, but they were in that top spot, number 1 or number 2 for 3 to 5 years. That it was a couple years ago that they were no longer named. And while I obviously don't have any inside knowledge or perspective from the company of Great Place to Work, my guess is that they no longer chose to participate in the survey. Now, that could be for a number of reasons. And again, I want to cautiously make assumptions is if you're number 1 for a while and you're maybe concerned that you would drop that status, you might choose no longer to participate. And I think there's different factors. Again, I have no direct information as to the why. But I do know, at least in terms of the media, is over the last few years, Google has faced some criticisms, like many companies, in terms of how they have either promoted or supported folks of color and women. And so there's been some other issues that have maybe at least popped up that folks may believe that may have impacted that. And again, I don't have the direct information to, validate that. But wanted to kind of share that. I do think the information is interesting. Great Place to Work does a really great job at their Trust Index survey. And it's really, it's solid foundational research around organizational culture. And so wanted to share kind of what are some key influence factors around organizational culture. And so one of the kind of the top three things that kind of influence an organization's success. And now I kind of want to kind of get you back in the mindset thinking about your own organizations. Core purpose, mission, vision, values. So does your organization have a core purpose, a vision, idea of what the organization's about in terms of everybody has that common understanding and they live it, right? It's not just to be able to like recite a mission statement. Do they live those values? And everyone that is a member lives those values. And number two is a high trust environment. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple more slides. And then the other third key part is how do you intentionally recognize and honor the engagement and success of employees? And again, next slide is going to talk about a few of those things. So purpose, again, mission, vision, values make sense. Elevator pitch is another way to look at it. You know, can everyone describe, the member of your organization describe the values or what your organization stands for in that elevator pitch, right? You're riding up in an elevator with someone and they say, hey, organization X, what are you about? Can folks really recite that there is really some strong purpose and value behind it? Trust culture, and this is huge. And trust is really broken down into a few different ways. And again, I want folks to reflect about your own organizations and think about how this may be present or not. Are the leaders credible? That could be the supervisors, managers, or president of an organization. Think of student orgs. Do you believe that your leadership is competent, honest, they communicate, they have everyone's best interest? Number two, are folks treated with respect as people and professionals? And so whether that's from supervisors, managers, or an organizational leadership or general members, the high trust is built and sustained when folks feel they're respected. And then number three is believing the workplace is fundamentally fair. And obviously this concept really kind of goes in that sense of the fairness, equity, that connects to values. Do people live their values? And it's really true. When there is an issue or conflict, how people work through that or lack thereof. And I'd seen some comments earlier in the chat, when you don't resolve something and address it, right, that impacts that culture. And so that impacts the trust. And then recognition, a little bit about research in the area of recognition, specific and relevant, and tie it to an accomplishment. Be timely, in the moment versus an end of the year celebration. We all love an end of the year party in celebrating our organizational successes, of course. However, a quick text message, email thank you, or acknowledgement when someone has done something really awesome for an org, the research proves that those are actually more meaningful. And then they also talk about being individualized. So if you know that I am obsessed with coffee, the biggest way to a thank you to my heart is buying me a cup of coffee, right? I don't need a big gift card, you know, to Amazon. Of course, I would never turn it down, right? I would appreciate it. But when you know there's something that one of your members really likes, reward them with that small token. And again, the research really talks about when it's individualized, people appreciate that. And then not forgetting the little things, those handwritten notes, shout outs, peer-to-peer thank you. You know, different environments, you might have kind of a, you know, even like a virtual thank you board where you recognize or you take time to do kudos at a organizational meeting. Just think about those ways that you can create a culture of positive care and recognition of people's successes. And then they talk about connecting it to the bigger picture. So how does that success that an employee or a member of the organization contributed tie to the bigger mission or vision? And then I'll wrap up this section with kind of tying it together with the trust model. So this is a model out of Great Place to Work. And they really talk about kind of some key components here. What influences trust? And really they're going to start with management. So, and I would call it the leadership of an organization. If you're not adding to that positive work environment or that organizational environment, you are likely more part of the problem. And so leadership has to take on a really key component, right? If I'm a leader of an organization, I need to own that part and really think about how I can make positive change and ensure that the folks around me feel valued, trusted, and pride. And so when you see kind of in the lower half here, it really connects to all those things we talked about. And then on the right-hand side, it talks a little bit about what credibility or respect, fairness, pride, or camaraderie may look like. You know, the word camaraderie, we don't probably often use as common in higher ed, but I would tie this to really about community. And so that sense of like, can folks, do they feel part of a community? Do they feel valued in a way that they can be their one self and who they are, their authentic self? So camaraderie is kind of defined that way in that work. Okay, so before I move to the part about culture audit, I want to pause and offer an opportunity for folks to either ask a question or provide a comment. Anything that you heard so far that either resonates, doesn't resonate, you have an example where this has worked or not worked in an organization you've been part of. Would really love to hear from folks in the room about kind of what is or isn't working, or again, did anything stand out to you that you found particularly interesting? And I will pause for a coffee break. Anyone want to share an example of even a conflict in an organization that, you know, really either had a strong impact or maybe a positive way that you all worked through it and were able to resolve? I'm sure there's ideas out there. I know just from my own experience that every organization has conflict and really some challenging things to work through. So I know there's some examples. I can throw a few out, but I would really love to hear kind of what are some of the things that folks have maybe struggled with in their own environments.
I mean, I could talk about a previous employer and a toxic environment if that would be helpful, but I don't
Sure.
feel anything's really coming to mind. We had this boss that was, how can I put this? Just inappropriate. And when it came time, my partner and I were working at the same company and in different positions, but when it came time, like after he was put on furlough to go back to the company or not, he actually decided to take a different position with a different company, getting paid a little bit less, but because of how toxic that work environment was, he decided to just go somewhere else entirely. So it makes a really big difference with like retention and recruitment. So that's like professionally what I can think of. That's it.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Because again, you know, any member of an organization, if they're toxic, they have an influence on the environment. But particularly, and the research shows, if your leadership is the more toxic one, that has a greater influence and impact on the organization. So again, I could be an employee or Scarlett and I can be employees in an organization, and my attitude could really pull down Scarlett's energy because I could be just kind of the negative one or never pulling my weight, so to speak, in the organization, dropping the ball. And again, that will have tremendous influence on the success of an organization. However, if the manager is the one that is doing that, clearly that has a greater impact. And so definitely when you think about that, do your own reflection. You know, if you're an officer in an organization, do you do a pulse check, you know, a couple of times a year in terms of gathering feedback from the members of the organization? What's working well, what's not? Excuse me, do you have any feedback for me? Any of those opportunities to really do some course correction, right? I mean, opportunity in the moment coaching, think about kind of what we can do better. So somebody put in communication. definitely big. I would also put with communication, sometimes that can connect to transparency. Another example I'd throw out for student organizations, and I knew this as a member of a fraternity, but for a number of years, I had advised a few fraternities and sororities. And one of the challenges I'd found in Greek organizations is that many that are national organizations are either rooted in some organizational values, that might end up being a little more detailed than maybe a general student organization. But at any rate, the Greek organizations often are founded on a particular either set of values or principles. And we often talk about sisterhood and brotherhood really being foundational, that, we live those values, we honor that. And often in situations where the toxic brother or sister in the organization was really pulling down the organization, they weren't pulling their weight. Maybe they were given some opportunities to kind of maybe take a pause. Maybe they had a lot going on personally. So there were some adjustments. But if the behavior was still toxic, I found that particularly Greek organizations have a very hard time letting go of members that aren't effective in the organization anymore. And folks will often go back to the idea, but he's a brother, I can't let him. And again, fundamentally, there is, you want to like really set people up for success. But I will tell you is if you have toxic things in an organization you don't address, it will weigh on the organization's continued effectiveness. And you may not see it in the immediate, but companies struggle with this all the time. What happens in a workplace where it's toxic? Employee turnover. And and again, we're seeing that in some different ways in the pandemic, where people are like, you know what, I really appreciated a flexible work environment, but, or if it's an environment that was not very helpful during the pandemic, folks have moved at other opportunities, and to either realign with any particular values. And the same thing will happen in student organizations. But oftentimes what happens in student orgs is members will kind of fall off, but they're still on the roster. They're still, have access to benefits of the organization, but they're kind of dead weight, so to speak, doing nothing. And I say this, to me, this is after you tried to really coach, help folks improve, provide support for success. I don't want folks to take away the notion that I'm not pulling my weight, I'm out immediately, right? I don't believe in that as a process, whether that's for an employee or a member in an organization. We really should all have the opportunity to continue to grow and improve, and support across our organization should always be there. And there might be a point that is no longer helpful or effective. And so think about that as far as your organization is. It's not about cutting losses in as much as what happens if you leave that bad apple in there to rot. The rest of the apples in the fruit bowl, remember that picture in the beginning, can be impacted. And so really thinking about, again, I would want folks to really exhaust all those opportunities to improve and look at ways to make that better. A few things before I move into the last part of the culture audit. Wanted to talk and share kind of some perspective from my lens on campus. What are some of those issues that come up for student orgs where student life and or my office might need to take actions? And this would be, and kind of give a few examples to kind of think about. Again, you can look at the policy documents that are in the slides, but really wanted to kind of think from kind of a overarching perspective is student orgs may be impacted with recognition if they're not following kind of basic policies. So in student life, in your student life advisors will talk about, following processes to reserve rooms, any paperwork that has to be completed before tabling, some of those, and I call those kind of lower level. There are things that are important to be done, but that's an organization isn't going to lose recognition tomorrow for that. There's going to be some coaching and opportunities to make sure the officers or whoever's reserving knows the process, and you work with a student life advisor. So those are things where folks might get kind of those early on reminders or reminded coaching about, you can't hang flyers here. They have to be hung in a different area. Obviously, if those are repeated behaviors, folks are only going to be given so many reminders, and that could impact your organization. And so it's really important that you do take some time, and not only as a member, but officers in an organization, review the toolkit on the Student Life website. They probably have already shared some of those resources already today, but it's really important that you understand what's expected of you as an organization so you can be most successful. Ones that I'll end up partnering with Student Life a little bit more, where we might need to take some, not just action against an organization, but maybe it's some individual student conduct with things that could be more serious. Maybe there's violations that connect with parties or substance use or abuse or underage violations. And so maybe there's something that's occurred, drugs, alcohol related, that is connected to a student organization in some way. And the Student Life would really look at a response, and then I would look at a response in terms of addressing any of those things. A couple other that we see often connect with, and I would put this under the umbrella together of hazing or bullying. And while for some of you that are here as Greek organizations, you probably hear the term hazing a lot more frequently than many of our other student orgs. But I would also put it as hazing occurs in non-Greek organizations, all kinds of orgs, athletic teams. When you set aside expectations for pledges, maybe it's Greek organization or new members, that they're being asked to do things in a way to prove their authenticity of being in an organization. That's hazing. It meets a definition of hazing. Other thing can be bullying members of an organization. And so really, we know kind of some of those behaviors that can be in-person online bullying, alienating people, leaving people out of group chats, and really not kind of confronting the source or addressing the problem. Those might meet a definition of bullying and could be a violation of the Student Code of Conduct. And I say this in that we want you as organizations to also hold each other accountable and work through inner conflict. Not every conflict needs to be reported to Student Life or my office or kind of taking it that level. I would say that we're resources for support. So if there are some conflicts that maybe an org is struggling with, that you would need some support with, please reach out to your Student Life advisors. And I'll share at the end a little bit about how my office can also proactively support organizations or where there's conflict. But I would argue that those behaviors left unchecked or unaddressed are likely going to eventually come our way. And so if you have a toxic organizational environment that's not being addressed, maybe it starts with a conflict of, I call it the drama, right? There's the one person was dating somebody else and there was a conflict. And so people have had a falling out, or no longer friends. That can be that inner drama. But if that starts to creep into isolating people, bullying people, threatening people, harassing people, and again, all those kind of behaviors that none of us ever really want to talk about, but they're real, and it comes up with student orgs and individual students on campus. It's definitely something that, I wouldn't say is super frequent, but it comes up frequently enough that a few times a semester, and Marguerite and Heather know this, especially as working with, is we often get some of those things. And so I would argue if you begin to address them earlier, maybe it doesn't blow up to be a bigger mess where now we're having the university to be involved because maybe the behaviors are really crossed into a violation where somebody is being impacted. And I would say there's been some bullying incidents with organizations that folks have had to seek out, and maybe they didn't disclose this in their organization, but had to seek out emotional and mental health support on campus. And, I hate to say that in that, was the organization the catalyst for someone to seek out mental health support? It may or may not have been, but we all know that we're also dealing with life, right? I am not just James Carroll, Director of Student Conduct. I am a spouse. I am a family member. I am a colleague. And right, there's other things that happen as part of my life that could add to stress and impact. And so the organization, your behavior that might be problematic might have not been the reason that pushed somebody into needing counseling or support, but it might have been part of that challenge. And we've had that come up where organizations have struggled that way. And the last one I'll mention there is really things around discrimination, harassment, and then Title IX related things such as gender discrimination, sexual violence. And again, we're on a college campus. We know where sexual violence does occur, and that can sometimes be either involving individual students or student organizations. And so really wanting to think about that folks understand what resources are on campus and then how we can support you. Okay, so I just looking here at a chat, and I'm going to pause. So what should clubs or members do that may not be interested in the club and don't have the time to interact with club activities and don't know how to address the issues like that? Brandon, could you maybe give some additional context of like how that might play out? Are you talking about a member that's struggling but isn't really sure how to address it?
So I think the point of view would kind of be like, as someone who's like sort of in charge of the club, and so they're trying to figure out how to get their members involved, but maybe they're too busy or they have other things on their plate and they can't actually get involved in that club and be actually get a part of that experience. So they may just be in the club but not actually interacting in those kinds of situations, and not actually interacting in like the events or things that would actually entail being a part of that club. So kind of those kinds of situations, and how would the club leaders address that and sort of like engage with their members and trying to get them involved?
Okay, yes, thank you for the question. And that actually, in a minute here, I'll share screen again, because that leads to one of the resources that I'd like to offer for folks to talk about addressing that. A couple of things really quickly is that I would say leadership of organizations need to do ongoing evaluation and reflection of your expectations. Okay, and so, and I would use example is, maybe all club members or org members are required to do 10 hours of community service, attend weekly meetings, and 5 events throughout the semester. Just throw that out there. And maybe that's too much, because based on some members are taking full-time course loads, they're working a job, they're taking care of loved ones or family, and maybe they can't meet that kind of an expectation. I think there's 2 things that need to occur. One, the organization needs to reevaluate. Are we creating really too high of an expectation for the culture of our organization? Then secondly, what do we do with individuals? So where do we begin to kind of create some space for, it's not about just letting another member coast, but again, right, there's impacts, because other org members, if they think that they're, quote, pulling their weight and meeting all those expectations, and they see other people that get a free pass and they get all the same benefits, yeah, we know how quickly that impacts an organization, right? That draws everyone else's motivation. And so that's why I would say that there's those 2 things. Leadership needs to reflect of those expectations and maybe redefine, rethink it through, and work to be transparent about how we might want to adjust. Or maybe there's a system in place where folks can get a particular 1 or 2 semesters of a reduced amount of work, and it's based in a couple of things: personal reason, course load, need for employment. Again, you could kind of come up with some of your own pieces there. But I'll actually go into share again, because I think this actually is one of those things. And so one of the things I wanted to close with is what is called an organizational culture audit. And so this is that self-reflection, whether you do a survey, a feedback loop in regular meetings. A quick exercise to do with a group is, in 3 words, describe our organization. Exit interviews as people graduate or leave. Focus groups. Sorry, it's not advancing. Whoops. Okay. And so with this, what I'll share is, in the folder for student life for my session, there is a 2-page document, which is, it gives a quick survey that you could give to your organizational members. And there's some free response questions or some Likert scale, respond 1 to 4. It's kind of like a 1-pager. And then the second page is some additional reflection that leadership can do. So it's an example that you could implement tomorrow with your organization. give everybody a survey. I mean, if you want to turn it into a Google Doc or form, right? So you can kind of do it that way. If you want to do the paper method because people are in person and you want it to be anonymous, so there's some ways there. And the other thing I'll offer is I am also willing to work with student organizations. Now, there's a lot more of you all than me, but I do have a background in organizational effectiveness. And so looking at culture audits, I would work with some leadership of a student org. We can also come in and do restorative justice work. So if there's been an inner conflict, so those are some examples of things that we can also do proactively or reactively in addressing issues. But I can also work with an organization if you want assistance in doing a culture audit. And really that's kind of that reflection of how well is our organization doing, individuals giving feedback about their leadership, and we're looking at values. And so the last thing I want to leave with, because I know we're right about time, is if folks would want to put something in the chat, is making your own commitment. Now, and again, this is not for me, it's really for you and your own kind of personal accountability. Is what is one commitment, task, or effort that you could make today to bring to your organization this semester to positively impact organizational culture? So if folks want to share in the chat, what's one commitment? It can be something really small that you want to do to demonstrate your commitment to positively affecting your organizational culture. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop share. And so again, encourage folks to just do a quick, what's something you could do, whether you're a leader or a member of an organization. Again, this could be work or student org. What's something that you can commit to doing to improve your culture of your org? So thanking folks, appreciation, more listening than speaking, weekly specific shout outs, anonymous survey feedback. I mean, yeah, those are some good examples too of how that can work. Acknowledging folks. And again, if you're looking, I mean, obviously Student Life has a number of resources for student org. So look at your toolkit, use those things. And I will put my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me. This is the work. Whoops. Sorry, I put it as a private message. Apologies here. This is work that I love. So engaging folks, looking at ways to improve an organization. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions, you need ideas on how to maybe address some conflicts in the organization. If you're needing to look at a workshop, again, work with your student life advisors and myself if you have things that would help benefit your organization. Again, I would love to say I could come to any organization that wants me, but if all of you started reaching out, we may need to kind of strategize some ways that maybe we do some collective workshops throughout the year additionally for student orgs in general, or maybe work with Heather and Marguerite for organizational president effort, or do a workshop for presidents or things like that. So again, thank you for letting me be part of the leadership conference today. And I wish you all the best of luck as you move forward in this semester, not only with your student organizations, but really any organizations you're part of. And again, thank you all for your time today. Appreciate it.